A top-level Israeli delegation is here in Washington this week to discuss the broad outlines of a once unthinkable agreement between Israel and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to normalize diplomatic relations. Nick Schifrin explains.
Several agreements shepherded by the Trump administration between Israel and its former adversaries comes now the prospect of the biggest prize. But at what price for Israel, the United States, and Saudi Arabia? At the same time, unprecedented civil upheaval grips Israel as Benjamin Netanyahu's government looks to restrain the country's Supreme Court in what his critics say could destroy the nature of Israeli democracy. With me now to discuss this and more is the Israeli Minister of Strategic Affairs, Ron Dermer. Ambassador Dermer, thanks very much. Welcome to the NewsHour. As I said, among the topics that you are here in Washington to discuss is the possible normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia, which U.S. officials tell me they are prioritizing, hoping in the next year. And part of that would be allowing Saudi Arabia to have civil nuclear capacity, including enrichment. Does the Israeli government support that?
Like so many things, the devil's in the details, and we're going to have to look at what ultimately is agreed upon. And you're right, the Saudis have put that, a civilian nuclear program, which you probably are aware of. They, as signatories of the NPT, they could go to China or they can go to France tomorrow, and they could ask them to set up a civil nuclear program and to allow for domestic enrichment. They could do that tomorrow if they wanted to. So the question that I ask myself is, if the U.S. is involved in this, what will that mean 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, 30 years down the road, and what's the alternative? And there are other issues the Saudis have put forward as well.
But it sounds like you're not against it, certainly, and that is not necessarily the policy of the Israeli government over the last few decades. There's been a long tradition opposing nuclear expansion in the region. It used to be known as the Begin Doctrine. After Menachem Begin, of course, former prime minister, founder of the Likud party, who, of course, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is a member of, Begin bombed an Iraqi nuclear reactor to prove his doctrine. Does this Israeli government believe the Begin Doctrine no longer applies?
No, the Begin Doctrine definitely applies. You have countries in the region that can have civilian nuclear power. That's a different story than a nuclear weapons program.
You're also, of course, asking for something. The Prime Minister's former National Security Advisor, Meir Ben-Shabbat, said this: Saudi Arabia joining the nuclear club would produce a widening of nuclear proliferation in the region. Other countries would work to acquire uranium enrichment capabilities in their own territory. So what does Israel want in exchange for that?
We're not going to agree to any nuclear weapons program with any of our neighbors. And the question will be, when it comes to the details of an agreement, what are the safeguards? And what happens if they take another path, if they take a path with the Chinese or something else? We have to think through that whole thing. But let's not underestimate the impact that an Israeli-Saudi peace agreement could have on the region and the world. I think if you get a Saudi-Israeli peace, you're going to have several other Arab countries and Muslim countries are going to follow.
Sure, but
I think it's the ultimate game changer.
But we also have to deal with the Palestinians. Of course, Saudi Arabia will demand significant concessions from Israel when it comes to the Palestinians. Let me give you some options. Ending illegal settlement activity, curbing especially large settlements, strengthening the Palestinian Authority, and expanding the territory under its jurisdiction. Are you willing to give any or all of that to the Saudis for this?
Well, this may surprise you, but I'm actually not going to negotiate on PBS. What we'll do, I will say, the way we look at this issue, it's not just this or that price for Israel. We would like to ultimately achieve a peace agreement with our Palestinian neighbors.
Saudis are making clear there's no peace with Saudi Arabia until there are these concessions for the Palestinians.
Well, I don't think they've been specific about what concessions.
They haven't, which is why I gave you some options.
And I think what Saudi Arabia looks at this move with the United States is something that will anchor their alliance with America for a half century. And I think we both have an interest in seeing if we can get the Palestinians on a path which can ultimately lead to a political settlement of the conflict.
Let's talk about judicial reform. These are efforts the Prime Minister describes as reforms to Israel's, quote, all-powerful judiciary.
Right.
You represent the government coalition that's negotiating with the opposition in the President's House in Israel. In the United States, as you know well, if the House of Representatives, by a small majority, wants to abuse the rights of the minority, it would pass a law that goes through the House, through the Senate, signed by the President of the United States, go through the federal court system, the Supreme Court, as guaranteed by the Constitution. In Israel, if the Knesset, if the parliament, wants to impose its majority on the minority, there's only one check, the Israeli Supreme Court. Why are you trying to remove that check?
Well, we're not trying to remove the check. I think there's been a lot of misreporting on that. There are many checks that the Supreme Court has on the authority of the executive branch and even on the Knesset. When a law is passed, they can decide whether the law is there's a conflict of interest, whether there was due process, whether it's proportionate, all these other checks. But there was an extra check that you don't have in your system here, which is the judges could decide, we don't believe this is reasonable. In Israel, you cannot replace the will of the public elected through their elected representatives with 15 unelected judges to decide that this is reasonable or unreasonable.
Since you've been pushing this through, there have obviously been massive, unprecedented protests across the country. The shekel's lost value, private capital inflows are down, Israel startups are registering abroad, Moody's, S&P have warned about investing in Israel, and of course, the military in Israel have repeatedly warned there is a crisis of readiness because of the fissures that your reforms have created in society and because reservists are now threatening not to show up. So is that not a failure of leadership by Prime Minister Netanyahu?
No, I don't think so. I think, unfortunately, some of these protesters have crossed lines that should never be crossed. We're a citizens' army in Israel. The army should have never been brought into it. And
Wait a minute, are you criticizing individual members for protesting at all? Is that what
No, of course not. The protest is a fundamental right in every democracy. What I don't think you should do, military reservists should not come to an elected government and say, if you don't adopt this or that policy, we're not going to serve
But
democracy.
you have Israeli military leaders warning the prime minister that this is a readiness issue. That's more than just the question of individual reservists.
Because the military reservists have decided that they're going to dictate the policy.
And the military leaders have said there's a significant
But the people who make decisions in a democracy are not military reservists or military officials. It's the elected branch of government, and that's Israel's democratic leaders that have to make that decision.
And for the first time in its history, next month, the entire 15-judge Israeli Supreme Court will hear an appeal against the law that curbs its own powers. Will you respect their decision?
Israel's a country of the rule of law. So we'll always abide by law. But it's important to understand, it's important to understand that the judges cannot be above the law. What's the authority? What's the authority that gives the power of the Supreme Court to decide to nullify a basic law? It's never happened in Israel's history.
That's correct. It's never happened. It's also never happened that the Supreme Court has to hear a case about curbing its own powers. So again, will you abide by the court? Will you abide by the court ruling?
The Prime Minister put out two principles. He said the government should always respect decisions of the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court should never be above the law.
Ambassador Ron Dermer, thank you very much.
Thank you.